Hello and welcome to my channel. If you go to serialkillercalendar.com, you'll find they sell magazines and books and trading cards. But you'll also find the Bender family, aka the Bloody Benders. And I believe that Ted Bundy had read about them. And so, because they were a family that moved there, and it talks about them, and they had killed all these people, and they had buried them in the apple orchard, and they became famous. People wanted parts of their houses, and they split them up, the parts of their houses, and so right down to everything that they had. And then there was all this money out for reward, and this family of killers became so famous, and they killed so many people. And then you can find a list of their victims here. But because he was talking about an apple orchard and killing somebody in an apple orchard, so I thought, I bet he read about them or heard about them or studied them. Maybe got a book from the library or something. I don't know where, but I honestly believe that maybe this is something that he knew about. So I thought I would mention this. And then they have Cosmic Bigfoot that you can go, and this talks about Anne Marie Burr. Okay, she went missing as a little girl, and they believe that Ted Bundy might have killed her, but there's so many different suspects. So you can find information about this all over the internet. And she went missing, and she lived about 3 miles from Ted Bundy. So, and that says 1961, and you can hear this is I guess you would call it a podcast, and you can listen to that, and it's really interesting. Let me see if I can find the part about the apple orchard. Hold on. Right here. It said, there weren't many other leads until the 1980s when serial killer Bundy told an interesting story to a journalist while he was on death row. He spoke about killing a young girl in an orchard, but wasn't clear on if this was something he heard about or something he did. And Ted Bundy grew up very close to Anne's home in Tacoma. So sometimes when he talked about sometimes he took credit. They believe that sometimes he took credit for murders he didn't commit, and sometimes he didn't admit to murders that he actually did commit. And they believe that maybe when he was talking about, maybe he was talking in a third person when he talked about murders that he had committed, so that he wouldn't be prosecuted for them. So, and then there's this is a podcast, and it talks about different killers. So, and it talks about the Benders, Little Slaughterhouse on the Prairie, the serial killer who terrorized 1870s Kansas. And you can find this on the internet as well. So it says, and listen to Apple Podcasts. I thought those were interesting. I thought I would throw this in there. And this is the girl that went missing. Here's a rather large photo of her. And she only lived 3 miles from him, but there are so many suspects that we don't know if Ted Bundy killed her or not. It says an unexpected rainstorm hit Tacoma, Washington on the night between August 30th and 31st. The Burrs, a Catholic family of 6, had put their children to bed just after 8 p.m. The storm awakened the parents throughout the night, as did their dog Barney, who kept barking at the storm in intervals until finally settling down. Indeed, Barney had been barking through the night for several weeks, and whenever they awoke, the Burr parents had heard noises outside as though someone were sneaking around the house. Neighbors corroborated that they spotted someone peeping in the late evening. And you can find this all over the internet. This night, however, the Burrs' eldest daughter, 8-year-old Anne, had taken her 3-year-old sister to the parents' room. Mary had a broken arm and often woke up at night crying. Beverly, Anne, and Donald comforted the little girl for a while and then instructed Anne to take Mary back to her room and try to sleep. Shortly after 5 a.m., Beverly Burr descended the stairs of her home, and it gives the address of the home, to find the living room window and front door wide open, although she and her husband, Donald, later stated to police that both had been locked. Upon investigation, her 4 children's bedroom, she discovered that Anne was nowhere to be found. She did discover that the garden bench had been moved from the back of the house to underneath the window of the room Anne occupied with her sister Julie, other than on the previous night when Mary had slept in the room with her. Moreover, there was a footprint in front of the bench and in the backyard of the property, too. Due to the heavy rainfall the night before, it's unclear which side it originally was. The police reported that it was a size 6 or 7 upon discovery. Now starting to panic, Beverly began pursuing the neighborhood, but once it became evident no one had seen her daughter, she and her husband called the police and National Guard combed the neighborhood. The case, which was investigated as an abduction from the beginning, was reported on by every single news outlet, large and small. The detectives assigned to this case, who first arrived on the scene, were Anthony Zatkovich and Theodore Strand. About 1.5 thousand people were questioned. Wow, that's a lot. By law enforcement within the first 2 weeks of the disappearance. To help the police rule them out as suspects, the Burrs took a polygraph test, which they passed. And there's some more photos. So, and then you can read more about it. And it talks about the suspects. You've got Ted Bundy. There's a 15-year-old Robert Bruzus, who lived 2 doors down from the Burrs, and according to author Rebecca Morris, allegedly spent so much time with little Anne that she referred to him as lover boy, and he called her his girl. Being aware how much stock Morris puts into dubious Bundy wayfarers such as Sandy Holt, I must recommend to take some of Morris with a grain of salt. So this is Robert Bruzus. Okay, a high school yearbook photo. And polygraph tests were known to be unreliable, yet it should be mentioned that while Bruzus passed his second test, he failed the first one. There were no records of arrest for Bruzus. He was never throughout his adult life suspected of inappropriate contact with children and continues to live a quiet life with his wife in Tacoma. Keeping in mind that the majority of child molesters are never caught, the above may not mean much necessarily. The second suspect was Ralph Everett Larkey, and there's some newspaper clippings about him. So it says Ralph Everett Larkey of Spokane was reported in serious condition in a hospital today after he was shot yesterday as Federal Bureau of Investigation agents closed in. Larkey, 48, was sought by Pierce County, Washington authorities on a kidnap charge in connection with the abduction of a 10-year-old Tacoma girl on July 20th. He also faced a federal charge of unlawful flight to avoid prosecution on the Washington charges. FBI agents said Larkey shot himself in the head with a small caliber pistol as officers knocked on the door of his motel room. So they're saying he committed suicide, which makes it sound like maybe he was guilty. So then there was a neighborhood nudist who was cleared by police early on, as were known sex offenders in the area. A ransom demand was made by a man who turned out not to have anything to do with the disappearance. So you can see there's so many different people that are considered suspects. It was estimated that she was abducted briefly before her mother got up at 5 a.m., but is in fact unclear at what time of the night or morning she disappeared. Sunrise occurred around 6:27 a.m. A boy walking with or driving a girl half his age around on Thursday, while many shift workers and early risers may and would have been spotted. Maybe I didn't read that right. Anyway, and certainly considered the area stopped to inquire what they were doing out and about this hour. That is, if Anne even went willingly. Had she not, and Bundy would have had to render her unconscious, his only option would have been to carry the girl if he was only on foot or transport her on the back of his bike. And then it shows a map. The statement that Burr took piano lessons next door to Bundy's favorite great-uncle, Jack Caldwell, the latter of whom he frequently visited, is yet another Ruleism. So Rule further claims that Anne followed Bundy around like a puppy. The Burrs never corroborated that Bundy ever met or knew their daughter on a personal level. That a neighbor boy like Bruce's had access to Anne is plausible, but how would Bundy have justified inserting himself into the little girl's life? Did Rule confuse Bundy with Bruce's, perhaps? The intensity of Robert Bruce's interest in Anne Marie is strange, but the latter also spent much time at the Bruce's home because she had bonded with his sister Franny over their love for budgies. Al Carlisle's speculative interview in his book I'm Not Guilty poses further issues. Also, I appreciate Carlisle's insight into Bundy's psyche and his incredible body of work. The decision to conduct an interview with basically himself and speculate based on his impressions what Bundy would answer to questions he usually avoided is unfortunate. This passage has haunted the online Bundy community for years. For a short while, he would be paranoid. When someone looked at him in a strange manner, he would wonder if they suspected him. After all, he had a paper route there. So that talks like Bundy had a paper route there. Carlyle took this statement directly from Rule, not Bundy, as did Morris. Another Bundy curiosity. Anne Marie, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Burr's mother's maiden name is Leach. If Anne was his first victim, then it is eerily coincidental Bundy's final victim's last name was Leach as well. And then this says, in an interview with Dr. Al Carlisle, Bundy admitted to having begun withdrawing into fantasy life early in life, around 8 years old. These fantasies were centered around rescuing girls he had developed a crush on but did not know how to approach or who rejected him. As he grew older, the fantasies grew more sinister. Now he was imagining endangering the young woman in order to rescue him. The next step, fueled by a combination of the consumption of true crime detective magazines, late-night peeping, and the violent atmosphere at home, Bundy crossed the line to mentally harming the objects of his desire. By 1969, aged 23, he began losing control and separating fantasy and reality. He broke into Seattle woman's basement apartment and he'd spied into previously, jumped onto her bed and began suffocating her with a pillow. The woman began screaming and he fled. In that same year, Bundy had rented a cheap motel while visiting his family before starting at Temple University in Philadelphia. His plan had been to overwhelm and rape a woman, unlocking her room, but he did not succeed. Lastly, Bundy walked up to a woman on the street, one unlocking her car and one unlocking her front door, beating them over the head, escaping yet again after they began screaming. All of the above shows Bundy acted rather clumsily in his early stages, and it took years until he was prepared enough to kill emotionally as well as logistically. This is what this says. So we are to believe that a 14-year-old boy who at the time harbored no murderous or harmful urges yet was a criminal mastermind, bar none, who let banish Burr without any practice or expertise, but afterwards he not only halted his killing urge for over a decade, but could be equally successful as he started up again. So that's what this one doesn't believe, that he did it. So it says Bundy grew up in a home of 7. Indeed, his mother, Louise, was pregnant with a 5th child, Richard. She reportedly woke up and walked around the house frequently throughout the night. Bundy's children all shared rooms with each other, which were located on the first floor. Even if Bundy had attempted to avoid Louise or waking the other members of the family as he snuck past the rooms by climbing out the window, would it truly have been enough not to wake the siblings in the room? So anyway, you can see this, and you can see there's letters, and they deny that Bundy could have done it. And I'm going to scroll through the photos. So, hold on. This says he never responded to Eleanor Rose Nasland, however, and we know most certainly that Bundy killed her daughter Denise. Likewise, upon being given a wide array of names to ascertain whether Bundy had murdered them, Bundy was truthful in his last days. See, I don't know if he was truthful or not. And this person believes that he was. So I don't know. You know, and this is just people's opinion and how they feel as far as I'm concerned. So this is some interesting reading. If you'd like to pause it and read it, you can, or you can go look for it. And it has some interesting photos. So, and then we're going to go on to the next one. And here's, I like this photo of the girls. It's a very beautiful photo. So, and I'm done. You can, well, I guess I should scroll down for you. And there's some more photos. And I don't know if Bundy did it or not, if he took this little girl. But they think that it would have been the first time he killed somebody. But this one says 1961, Anne Marie Burr. On August 31st, 1961, Anne Marie Burr's mother woke up to find the front door open from the inside and little 8-year-old Anne Marie Burr missing from the home. The living room window, which had been open or cracked the night before, was open even wider the next morning. A garden bench had been removed from the backyard and placed in front of the living room window. The only evidence of an intruder was a piece of red thread stuck in the window jamb and a footprint in the mud outside the window, which had been distorted from the previous night's rain. Supposedly, it was a shoe size 6 or 7. There were no witnesses except the family dog, who was heard barking during the night. Nobody bothered to check. They figured the dog was barking at the thunderstorm. There was no evidence of a struggle. In fact, it appeared that little Anne Marie Burr went willingly with whoever took her. Neighbors claimed that days prior to her disappearance, they saw a figure peeping through the windows of the Burr residence. However, no detailed description of this individual could be given. Suspects were aplenty. There was the neighborhood nudist. There was a man who was friendly with the youngest of the children, letting them pick the plums from his tree, kissing their hands, patting their buttocks, and giving them candy. He also had a fetish for pregnant women. There was Robert Bruises, a 15-year-old friend of Anne Marie, who preferred the company of younger children to those his own age, had a flirtatious relationship with Anne, and failed the first polygraph test. Although he passed the second polygraph test, he was never ruled out as a suspect. Ralph Everett Larkey had kidnapped a 10-year-old girl and took her on a joy ride full of treats and suspected sexual relations. When the FBI showed up at his door to question him about Anne Marie, he committed suicide. More suspects surfaced over time, but not one person could be tied to the case, which soon became cold. That is until someone decided to point the finger at Ted Bundy. Rumors and tall tales of prowling midgets outside the windows, young boys standing over muddy ditches and construction sites, and unsubstantiated confessions allegedly by Ted himself to other children he wasn't even friends with. Ted Bundy and Anne Marie Burr have more or less become an urban legend thanks to Anne Rule, who planted a seed which has never stopped growing. Ted Bundy was 14 years old at the time of Anne Marie's disappearance and lived 3 miles away from the Burr residence. It is rumored that they were acquaintances because Ted's uncle lived nearby where Anne Marie took piano lessons. The only thing that ties Ted Bundy directly to Anne Marie Burr is that he was her family's paper boy. I can see why everyone thinks Ted did it. There has been a book written about the alleged connection between Ted Bundy and Anne Marie Burr, which I feel is tabloid trash. The author does everything in her and now I don't want to read that because now they're degrading somebody else because they don't agree with them. And when you don't agree with someone, that doesn't mean you put them down and call their writing trash or call them crazy or anything like that. You know, you should respect other people's opinions, or if you don't, not necessarily respect their opinions, but you should still treat them with respect. And this has all kinds of newspaper articles that you can click on. So this is really good. I just don't want to read that part. So, and then it talks about the DNA evidence failing to link, but so now we're going to go read something else. This is a timeline of Ted Bundy. So you can find this. It is Department of Psychology, Radford University. It's online. It was summarized and researched by Ben Lawson, Kevin Lillard, and Tim Mayer. So you can find this online, and it talks about him at different ages and what he's doing. So at the age of 3, he's caught standing beside his aunt's bed grinning after he placed knives in bed, all knives pointing to her, at the age of 3. At the age of 4, okay, they moved. Okay, let's see. It says right here, at the age of 11 to 17, Ted is suspected of burglaries as a teenager from the ages of 11 to 17, but no charges were ever pressed. So, and then at the age of 18, upon his graduation, he admitted that he began stealing regularly. So it's possible that he was going into people's homes and peeking into their homes at the age of 11. So, yeah. So that's interesting. And then we're going to go here if it'll open up because I have a lot of tabs open. And this is mynorthwest.com. And it said author Ted Bundy was capable of killing Tacoma child as a teen. So, and you have to understand that people will get their opinion and then they'll try to convince you that their opinion is the right opinion. But, you know, you have to form your own opinions. Investigators are hoping a vial of Ted Bundy's blood found in Florida will be useful in solving cold cases, including the case of Tacoma, 8-year-old, who went missing in 1961. Bundy was only 14 years old at the time of 8-year-old Anne Marie Burr's disappearance. But an author who has been investigating the case for 4 years said Bundy showed signs early on that might indicate he was capable of such a killing. This one says he was very capable of this by age 14, said Rebecca Morris, author of upcoming book Ted and Anne, The Mystery of a Missing Child and Her Neighbor Ted Bundy. By age 8, he was killing animals, taking apart animals, setting animals on fire, and taking little girls into the woods to urinate on them, says Morris. And I don't know if any of this is true, but this is what it says. By 14, when Ann Burr disappeared, he was prowling neighborhoods, prowling on his bike, peeping through windows, and stealing. Moore said Bundy's family reports unusual behavior starting as early as age 3. At age 3, he was putting knives around a sleeping aunt. When she'd wake up scared, he really delighted in that. Moore says mutual friends of Ted Bundy and Anne Marie Burr report the two knew each other. In 1961, police didn't know who Ted Bundy was. He was a 14-year-old boy living a couple of miles away from the Burr home in North Tacoma, says Morris. Once we knew Ted Bundy was Ted Bundy and that he was from Tacoma, police began to look at him as a possible suspect. Before he was executed in 1989, Bundy confessed to more than 30 murders and was suspected of many more. Morris says that in 1987, Bundy offered a type of hypothetical confession in the Burr case. In 1986, he and Beverly Burr, Ann Burr's mother, were corresponding. He denied in letters in 1986, but in 1987 he did give a kind of hypothetical confession to killing her. While Bundy is typically known for his killing of college co-eds, Moore says there's also children among his victims. His very last victim was 12 years old, and there's some other children mixed in there. Moore says the two original detectives in the Burr case believe Bundy is an unlikely suspect, but she's very interested to see if they can establish a link to the notorious serial killer with a new DNA profile. A bulletin will be sent to law enforcement agencies across the country when the DNA from the Florida blood sample is uploaded to the National DNA Database. Tacoma police are among those waiting. By Jamie Griswold, MyNorthwest.com editor. The Associated Press contributed to this report. So let's see what else we have. jttownsend.com. Ted Bundy's first victim, the vanishing of Anne Marie Burr. So this one says Ted Bundy's first victim, question, the vanishing of Anne Marie Burr. And I'm wondering where would he put her body at that age, but I don't know. So it says this article was previously published in Snitch magazine and the Clues historic true crime website. She was an innocent blonde child who got into the wind, snatched from her home in the dead of night and carried off into oblivion. He was a handsome stranger spinning a web, hiding a wicked serial killer who raped and murdered more than 30 women. Did Anne Marie Burr and Ted Bundy cross paths in the same Tacoma, Washington neighborhood? Likely the recent Elizabeth Smart saga, the kidnapping of 8-year-old Anne Marie, was a national fixation back in 1961. Below the radar of suspicion was a 14-year-old paperboy, Ted Bundy, the kid from the next block. But he wasn't from the next block. Some say he was from the next block and some say 3 miles. So I don't really know which is true. Ever since Bundy died in Florida's electric chair, detectives, writers, and armchair sleuths have debated his involvement in the Burr case. Was the proximity of the future monster to the missing angel an eerie coincidence, become an urban legend, or a spicy twist to a cold case? So then it talks about Little Girl Lost. And it talks about them going to bed. And you can pause this and read it if you want to, because it's a pretty interesting case. And if he did kill her, they believe it might have been the first one. But then that other gentleman committed suicide, so it could have been him. So, and this shows a picture of him at the age of 15. So you wonder how he could have gotten rid of a body, but I don't know. And this talks more about Ted Bundy. This shows a photo of Ted Bundy right here. You'll see him right here. And this is a year before she went missing. And it said they lived 3 miles away. So some of them say one place and some of them say another place. And like I said, you can pause this and read it. If I read all of these that I have open, this is just going to go on forever. So, and here's a picture of Kimberly Leach. So, and this talks about did he or didn't he. So, and there's some more photos. This one says a psychiatrist who studied Bundy labeled this extraordinary bizarre behavior in a toddler indicative of a traumatized child who was not only unwanted but was punished for having been born. In an email to this writer, Anne declares, "My personal opinion is that Ted Bundy killed Anne Marie Burr. And though she's written about hundreds of murder cases, every time I give a talk in the Northwest, someone asks about Anne Marie. A recent TV adaptation of her book ends with an erroneous flashback of young Ted approaching Anne Marie on her porch in broad daylight. The final shot shows them walking off hand in hand as neighbors bustling about." So, and I don't know. Can you imagine growing up like that? And this is very interesting. Alright, so we'll go to the next one now. And I may not go to all the websites I have open because I have a lot of them open. And this one says The Morbid Library. So, and that's another interesting website. Bundy, Anne Marie Burr, suspected. So, and this one says our first post in this Bundy series is going to focus on what many consider Bundy's likely first victim, Anne Marie Burr. The Burr case is also probably the most heavily covered and investigated of the 14 we're going to cover for this series. So you can go to the Morbid Library to read it. Talks about her age, her weight. The school that she went to was Grant Elementary School. She was in the 3rd grade. She was artistic and likely playing the piano. So this And there's a photo of her. And this talks about the disappearance. And we've already talked about that, the dog barking. And there's another one of that one. It talks about the Bundy Connection. And this one says his great uncle lived blocks from the Burr home, and he had been known to visit frequently, which is likely how he came into contact with Anne Marie. So, and I don't know if 3 miles in between is far on a bicycle or not. So, and let's see what this one says. Historybyday.com. Whatever happened to Anne Marie Burr? So here's some photos. Talks about the night of her disappearance. The door unlocked and the window wide open. It has photos. And whoops. This one says, did she climb out of the window? But it sounds like she went through the front door. And it was Labor Day weekend. So, and she was about to start the 3rd grade, it says. Talks about a storm sweeping the city. And I believe the lights went out. That night a storm swept through the city. Trees blew down, lights went out, and the neighborhood was left in darkness. The next morning, Anne-Marie was gone. In her bathrobe, Beverly went to the neighbor's house, knocking on the doors and asking if they'd seen her daughter. No one had seen her. Beverly walked around the side of her house, which was when she saw the garden stool beneath the open living room window. She ran to her husband to wake him up, and they called the police. So, yeah. So, and it says there was a peeping Tom hanging around. So someone was peeping in the windows. That's interesting because Ted Bundy, uh, some of them say that he did when he was older peep in the windows. So they waited for a ransom call. It was front page news. They talk about their history and their family and keeping and then losing her faith. So this is really interesting too. So, and then it shows photos of the neighborhood. And this talks about George Weyerhaeuser was kidnapped in 1935. So, and it seemed like a safe neighborhood. And there's another photo. That's cute. So, and this talks about other people and what happened. So this is really interesting. It says Beverly was 8 years old when Charles Madsen murder took place, and here she was all these years later, and her own 8-year-old daughter was missing. So Beverly remembered riding her bike with her friends past the Madsen house. She pointed to it and declared, "That's where the boy was taken from." So there's a lot of really good photos. That's really cute photos. It said the kidnapping left the police baffled. Investigators questioned sex offenders in the area, but they started to speculate that Anne Marie might have known her abductor. And it says, as soon as the police were called to the Burr home, Donald and his brother Raleigh searched the neighborhood. They looked through construction sites at the University of Puget Sound, which was located about 2 blocks away. At the time, 7 campus buildings were under construction, which meant lots of deep ditches and excavated sites. Near one of the building sites, the men noticed a teenager kicking dirt into a ditch with his foot. They could have sworn they saw a smirk on the kid's face, too. Donald would never forget the face of the teen standing nearby and watching them search for his daughter. Was it a young Ted Bundy? They said it was the largest search in Tacoma history. Donald urged the police to search the university's campus, which they did, and what they found were no open ditches. By the time they searched the site, only days after Anne Marie was kidnapped, all the ditches were filled and the roads opened. Traffic was already driving over the spot where the creepy teenage boy was standing with a smirk on his face. Still, the hunt for Anne Marie turned out to be the largest search in Tacoma history. It lasted months. The police, National Guardsmen, and Fort Lewis soldiers spent hours upon hours scouring fields, abandoned buildings, sewers, and waterways. Detectives crawled under houses and searched attics, but the search was fruitless. A three-man crew searched the sewage system going underground and using portable lights to probe the pitch-black flumes of the city's sewer network through the north end. Volunteer scuba divers searched the main outfall pipe on the commencement bay near Tacoma's favorite night spot, the top of the ocean. A rushing flow of storm drainage and sewage could easily push a body out into the bay, but they found nothing. So it's pretty horrific. The police tried questioning little Mary Burr, who was only 3 at the time. Mary happened to be the last person to see her sister alive, but the toddler was simply too young to articulate if she had seen anything. Then it talks about a lack of evidence. A fake confession letter. It's pretty interesting. Enter Ted Bundy. Of all the suspects, one person was of particular interest, and to this day he is considered a very likely culprit in the case. I'm sure you've all heard of Ted Bundy. Yes, we know the famed serial killer now, but back in 1961, no one suspected him. Talks about a damaged boy. In 1946, Eleanor Louise Caldwell was unmarried and pregnant, so she went to Elizabeth Lund Home for Unwed Mothers in Burlington, Vermont. There she gave birth to her son November 24, 1946. She then left her baby, returned home, and then came back to retrieve the boy at her father's insistence. Unsurprisingly, Ted Caldwell, later Bundy, was a damaged child. In 1986, in preparation for death row legal appeal, tests were performed on him, and a psychologist concluded that he lacked any core experience of care and nurturance or early emotional sustenance. So people question if she was his first victim, and if he was capable of committing murder at such a young age. So, and this is historylink.org, where you can also find some interesting history about it. So if you want to go there to read that, you can. And this talks about him and has some good photos. So, and I thought this was a really interesting website as well. So I just wanted to show you this. And then Wikipedia also has the disappearance of Anne Marie Burr, where they collect a lot of information, and it's good information, so you could go here to read it as well. So, and this says that he did deliver newspapers near Burr's house. So, and this talks about that. So it talks about the initial search, and it talks about the potential involvement of him and the aftermath and things like that, and the initial search efforts for her. And then we have this right here, which also has some good information. It has a nice photo, and it's very short. It says, 8 years old Anne Marie Burr disappeared from her Tacoma home on August 31st, 1961. To this day, the two more likely suspects are still Robert Bruises, who was 17 years old at the time of the disappearance, and Ralph Everett Larkey, who committed suicide after the FBI showed up at his door. The case grew cold until Ann Rule started to link Ted Bundy to the disappearance without any evidence, it says. She made connections that didn't exist, so I don't know. And then this it gives you a map, supposedly showing you one house and the other. So, and I don't know which is true and which isn't, because, people disagree. And then we go here, and this is the Charlie Project, and it talks about Anne Marie Burr. It says she's been missing since August 31st, 1961, and it shows many photos, and then it also shows a photo of Ted Bundy. And it talks about what she might have been wearing when she went missing, and different spellings of her name. And it talks, said she was last seen at her home. She shared her bedroom with her 3-year-old sister who had a broken arm at the time. In the middle of the night, Anne-Marie brought her sister to her parents' room because the young girl's cast was bothering her and she was crying. Their parents told them to go back to bed. Anne-Marie has never been heard from again. Her mother got up at 5:30 a.m., discovered she was missing. The front door had been locked and chained the evening before, but Anne-Marie's mother found it unlocked from the inside and open. There was a small living room window they had kept open a few inches, and in the morning it was found open wider, with a piece of thread stuck in the jamb. A garden bench had been taken from behind the house and put in the front of the house. A faint footprint was found outside the open window. It had been distorted by the previous night's heavy rainstorms, but authorities believe it was taken from a kid sneaker size 6 or 7. A small man or a teenager would have feet that size. A similar footprint was found in the back of the house by the basement window. Anywhere, and no sign of a struggle in her bedroom. Her sister and her 2 brothers who slept in the basement had not been disturbed, but the family's dog had barked that night. Neighbors reported that in the days prior, they had seen someone. And now I lost my place because it kind of froze up. Let's see. Neighbors reported that in the days prior to, they had seen someone in their yard peering into their windows, but they couldn't describe the person. Anne-Marie's disappearance was treated as an abduction from the beginning. Authorities theorized she was possibly taken by someone she knew. So, and this talks more about the investigation. So, I mean, what do you think? Do you think that Ted Bundy, because you know you can't, you don't know if he's telling the truth, you don't know if he's lying, and some people say he was a pathological liar. Some people say that he admitted to killing people that he hadn't killed and took credit for it, and some people say that he denied killing some of the people that he did kill. And you know he's a murderer, so I don't know if he's going to be an honest person. So what are your thoughts? Do you think he killed her? Do you think somebody else killed her? Do you think the 17-year-old killed her? Or maybe it was someone else in the neighborhood completely? What are your thoughts on the subject? And please feel free to leave comments. And don't forget to stop and pray for her loved ones and her family. And thank you so much for tuning in. Have a great day. Bye-bye.